Is your debt causing you sleepless nights? Knock your debt out with Debt KO. And your debt won't be the only thing keeping you up at night. Debt KO, free impartial advice on all your debt.
This is UMAR AHMED for IFL TV in association with MTK Global. We have a huge fight week this Saturday between Daniel Dubois and Joyce. Heavyweight clash, two unbeaten fighters. With me, I've got Andy Lee, Ben Davison, and the one and only Gareth Davies. How are we doing, gent?
All good?
All good, thanks, mate. You?
Very well, thanks, Ben. Gareth?
Good.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, so Andy, let me come to you first about this fight. Is the key here for Joe to make Dan fight at pace that he's never really fought at before?
Yeah. But in doing that, you'd assume he has to be aggressive and try to come forward and push the pace, where in doing that, he might leave himself exposed to a big right hand. There's ways you can see both guys winning, but also both guys losing. You know, it's really is an intriguing fight. Both guys have different sets of skills. But like there is so many factors, so many unknowns around Dubois in terms of his level of experience and competition. But so far, you can't fault what he's done and how he's done it. Joyce is probably the more tested and the more definitely the more experienced. But is that going to be enough? Can he use that to negate what Dubois is, which is like a devastating, fast puncher with very good fundamentals? There's always a risk, and you're always rolling the dice in some way when you're fighting a big puncher like Dubois. If you go forward, if you try to box him, I think Joyce has to be clever. Try to box a clever fight, a controlled fight. Yeah, certainly control the pace. But I think if he should be trying to slow the pace in some ways, keep it technical, if he can, especially early in the fight, and then try to see what happens when Dubois goes past 6 or 7 rounds.
Ben, we know that Joe is prone to taking shots. Do you think he's going to have to eat leather, especially early on from Daniel, and survive that early onslaught?
Listen, it's a 12-round fight. Both men are going to get it. It's as simple as that. But what Andy touched on there is key for me. I think it's when you're saying about Joe, is it key for Joe to push the pace? But it's when he tries that could be key. Because if he comes out and tries it too early and gets caught cold, so to speak, then big questions will be asked early. If he finds and gets in sync with Dubois' pattern, because that's something I've seen with Dubois. The punches seem to be often in the same rhythm of a doof, 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 doof. There's not much change up of rhythm there. So if Joe can get in sync with that, let Dubois tire a little bit and then start pushing the pace and pick the pace up on him and see how he deals with that in the second half of the fight, that may be a smarter approach. But Dubois got extremely sound fundamentals, and he'll always be dangerous in there. I think that Joe's boxed the more accomplished opponents, but I would probably say Dubois boxed, the fights with Gorman. They're, 50-50 fights that your opponent's coming to win. And he's had that experience of, am I supposed to win this fight? I'm not so sure Joe's had it to the same extent, if I'm being honest.
Okay. Gareth, anything to add to that, what Andy and Ben said so far?
Well, what I'd say first of all is the two guys that just spoke have incredible boxing knowledge, both of them. I mean, it's a privilege to be friends with them, and I always value both of their opinions. They are both so erudite and so detailed in how they understand the sport. I completely agree with everything both of them have said. I've made a lot of notes about this fight, and I tend to make more notes about fights that are a much bigger debate. There's a big debate about this fight. And also we add into the mix that it's two heavyweights. And anything can happen with one punch in heavyweight boxing. I mean, we saw it in Andy Lee's fight when he won the world title. Anything can happen in a world title with the best punch placed, a hook, an uppercut. We've seen it so many times, but particularly in this fight, I've been watching a lot of Joe Joyce. He's not difficult to hit. He advances and can be relentless, but I don't think he will in this fight if he's sensible and if he and Ismail Salas have got their game plan right. He took that dangerous body shot from Bryant Jennings early in that fight, if you remember, and he had to cover up for a couple of rounds, and I wonder if he's a little bit vulnerable to the body. He has a better resume, but as Ben said, it depends how you look at that resume. And when he fought those guys like Ustinov, Bryant Jennings and Bermain Stiverne, he's got slower hand speed, I think, than Daniel Dubois. And he's not the biggest jabber in the world. He tends to fence with his jab. He wants to walk you down and throw winging punches and overwhelm you. They're both novice pros. 43 rounds Joe Joyce, 33 rounds Daniel Dubois. The Joyce experience, as Andy said, is key. Neither man is particularly defensive, but you'd have to say that Daniel's fundamentals are probably a little better in the 33 rounds that we've seen him. And then on Daniel, he's not really been hit. He's got youth on his side. Will he feel any nerves on this major occasion, rescheduled 3 times? He was very good against Nathan Gorman, but a wily old character in Kevin Johnson took him 10 rounds. And I think he's probably slightly quicker on his feet. The way that my final thing, the way that Joe Joyce looks for this fight, physically he looks leaner, and I do think he's genuinely going to try and take it past 4 or 5 rounds.
Okay. Ben, you've seen Joe close and personal when he's been sparring in the wild card with Tyson. Is it true about his engine and his relentless work rate that the guy just doesn't stop? Is that true, Ben?
Yeah, he's got phenomenal. He's got a phenomenal engine for a man of that size. It was actually in Big Bear when Joe was training with Abel Sanchez. He's got a phenomenal engine. We all know about his chin. One thing I will say is where they're polar opposites is I think the bar for a big man's got extremely good coordination, hand and foot coordination. Whereas Joe, I would say, his coordination's not as good, but he actually makes it work for him in a way where he can be very busy in his non-punching activity, moving, and it's hard to sort of get in sync with and read because there's so much movement going on. It's unorthodox. It becomes hard to read because it's not something that you often see. When you see a typical pattern of a fighter that's quite textbook, it can be quite predictable. Whereas Joe makes his lack of coordination and unpredictability sort of work for him. One thing I'm a little bit wary of is when he sometimes tries to move his head, but rather than actually engage with his shoulders to move his head, he sort of leans and he takes his head outside of his base, which sort of costs him his balance and an opportunity to come back with a shot and counter. But it's an interesting one because they're polar opposites in some ways and quite similar in others. So, but it's a real intriguing fight.
Andy, we know Daniel's got tremendous balance. He's efficient with his output, and that's why the guy punches so hard. It's clear to see, and he's very methodical, if you like, that jab with that right hand left to the body. Do you think if Joe can upset that rhythm and balance of Daniel, that's another key for Joe in this fight?
Yeah, like touch on what Ben said is when you're fighting somebody who's like a classically trained boxer, like maybe you would say Dubois is like a jab, a 1-2, a double jab, right hand kind of thing. The way to offset them is to be awkward and to be unorthodox in front of them. And Joe is that. I would like from Joe's point of view, you'd hope that he's working on a jab, using a strong and long jab to try to. A jab that will stop, not just paw and fence, as Gary said, but stop Dubois in his tracks and kind of make him think about coming into distance, make him think about trying to close that gap. But yeah, I was just nodding my head and everything Ben said there, because it's just how the Joyce experience is more based on his amateur fights. Fights with Herkovic, fights with Usyk and if he can use that experience, not to retaliate. If he does take a shot, not to retaliate. I don't see Joyce having the best reactions in terms of that, but he kind of grows as the fight goes on, where he'll figure things out as the fight goes on, where if he's getting hit with a certain punch, it might hit him 3 or 4 times before he'll start to block it or counter it or defend against it. But with somebody like Dubois, it might be too late. You might not get 3 or 4 chances to figure out what's coming at you. It is like Dubois has been hurt. We saw that in the Lati fight. And what he did when he was hurt was he looked to retaliate immediately. That's an experience that can go against you. It can work for you. Against Lati, it did. They traded really hard. As soon as he got hurt, he got tagged. He came back and they exchanged. And there must have been 15 or 14 punches thrown in that exchange. That can work for him. It didn't against Lati. But with someone like Joyce, it might not work for you. It might cost you a fight where if you leave yourself exposed, trying to get back a punch that, where in a more experienced fighter, what you might say Joyce is, or just soak it up and say, okay, you got me that time, but next time you won't get me. It's an interesting fight, and the winner of it goes on to big things, and the loser. What makes this fight so good is that the loser, you really see it hard for him to come back from this. Really, Dubois, maybe if he loses, then you can put it down to an experience, and what way he loses will be the factor in that as well. But if Joyce is, I think Joyce has a lot more to lose in this fight than Dubois.
Gareth, you agree with that? If Daniel and Joe get up close and personal and start trading off, that it suits Daniel slightly more?
It might be a shootout. You never know. If they could get into it straight away. If Daniel Dubois comes flying out, which I don't think he will, I think he'll go behind his jab because it worked so well against Nathan Gorman. And it's a tried and trusted method that worked in a fight. There was a lot of pressure on him, and it worked brilliantly. I mean, was it 5th round stoppage? And he barely took a punch in that fight. I think that'll be his policy. And I think he'll try and break Joe down. I think he's got a faster jab anyway. We could have a phony war for a couple of rounds where they just circle. It could just be a shootout. You never know with these two guys what's going to happen. And as Andy said just there, and I have rewatched that Lati exchange, Daniel was drawn in there, and he was fighting on instinct, wasn't he? It was an instinctive finish to get him out of there, which is a good thing about him, I think. What is clear in my mind is, and I often go on this when I'm picking a fight, you look at the shape of people's punches. Daniel is a more direct puncher, yeah? He has a more direct lateral punch coming, a straightforward punch. Joe's punches seem to cover more ground because he prefers to, I think I'm right in saying, he prefers to hook, likes to get inside the distance, and then I call it winging.
Bit more of a clubber.
A clubber, yeah, exactly, but throwing, winging, clubbing. And I think if you're trying to get your man to keep the clubber away, you ping out that hard jab, ramrod jab down the middle, don't you? And you keep his rhythm down. Now, as I said, I'm talking to two guys here who technically know so much more than me, but I go instinctively on shapes. And as a result, I am picking Dubois to win it, because I think he'll get his shapes in order in the first 4 or 5 rounds. And I think he'll just explode on Joe. But I kind of want Joe to take it beyond 6, because I want this to be a classic. I want it to be, as classic as Henry Cooper and Joe Bugner all those years ago. And Henry Cooper won by 1/4 of a point and took Harry Greb, the referee, to court afterwards for the decision. I want it to be dramatic. The answer to the question you asked, because I digressed massively there, was I think both men can recover from this, but it depends on the manner of the defeat. If we have a 12-round ding-dong, both of them can come back and do anything. If someone's sparked out and it's Dubois, there'll be question marks about his chin going forward against a higher level opponent. if Joe gets beaten and he's 35 to the 23-year-olds, he'll have to rebuild in a much more different and maybe difficult way. But like the two other protagonists here tonight, Umar, is such an intriguing fight. And there's so many levels and so much nuance to pick through. I cannot wait for that first bell.
Ben, what do you think about both camps sharing the same sparring partner?
Nah, I think it's don't mean fuck all, really, to be honest. Sorry for the language. Listen,
who's the common sparring partner?
Solomon
and Jack.
Yeah.
Look, the thing is, sometimes you'll go into a fight, and you can go into a fight with a set game plan. Yeah, let's just say, for example, Joe's plan is to go out there and force the pace from the get-go on Dubois. Gets clipped with a couple of shots, gets stiffened, gets hurt. All of a sudden, that game plan now changes. Let's say Daniel comes out and goes, I'm going to stick behind the jab. All of a sudden, lands a shot. All of a sudden, it changes. Let's say Daniel gets caught. All of a sudden, it changes. So, in a fight, it's not like there's elements of, okay, this is the way we're going to go about it, but there has to be variety off of that. If this happens, this is what you do. If that happens, this is what you need to do. I think that there's something that we've all really not mentioned is we all keep going, if this person comes out and starts the pace, if this person comes out and starts the pace, but I wouldn't be overly surprised if both men come out and look to take the time and take a look at one another. I wouldn't be surprised with that at all. But there is a valid point that you made there, Gareth, as well, that I do think that in an exchange, Daniel probably gets the shot off first. With a little bit more defense to his offense. And, you know, I think, but what we're talking about Joe being effective in terms of, he is a bit of a clubber. He's not a snappy type of puncher. There's a difference in terms of, you know, when you're talking about power, I'd say he's probably the type of guy that hits quite densely, as opposed to with snap. I'd say Dubois is probably a bit between the two. I think that Joe sort of, I'm going to break you down bit by bit by bit. So I do think if you're talking about Joe's punch output and punch volume going up and being high, I would say the smarter approach is for him to look to do that in going into the second half of the fight, in my opinion.
Yeah, almost like this is no insult to Joe Joyce, but like in some ways like an older George Foreman, where
100%,
he'll take what's coming. He'll walk forward. He'll take what's coming. Boom, boom. He'll take two. Yeah, okay, you got me, young man. You got me. But I'll keep coming. And he'll keep boom, boom. He'll keep plodding, bang, hitting you with everything, hitting you on the shoulders, hitting you on the arms. And if he can take Dubois' punches early on and keep walking through, he might break Dubois' spirit. Dubois is a young fighter, very inexperienced as a pro, 23 years old. And when you've given a fighter your best punches and he's coming walking onto you still and firing back at you, that can be heartbreaking. And that could be a way Joyce wins it if he's able to take and sustain punches from Joyce.
That is something that I look at, because I do. One thing that both guys have always sort of been the physical dominant in the fights that they've been in. If Dubois is getting outmanned by someone who's more physical than him, does he have the intelligence to be able to control the pace of the fight, slow the fight down? Is he able to change his own rhythm, give a slow look into a fast look? I don't know if he's able to do that. From what I've seen, he's quite, you know, it's all quite in the same rhythm. The same rhythm, you become comfortable with it. When you're constantly changing the look and rhythm in front of someone, you know, they have to take a second to look and respect it to see what you're up to. But I don't think he's been in a situation there yet where he's been forced to do that. So there's lots of questions about both men, and I do feel like this is the really interesting part. I do feel like both men are the right men to ask those questions of each other.
The other thing is they're both going into the most important fight of their lives with no crowd, you know, and I do think we've had some amazing fights during lockdown and with no crowds, but again, this should have been a 20,000 sellout somewhere, so that alters something as well. I mean, you both know this. When you've got a crowd there, it brings some other types of emotions out of you that can get something special if you do go down and you have to get up again. So I think the lack of crowd, and I think there's more pressure on Dubois. I just have a sense there is. You know, whether he's got a great poker face, he may be the opposite. He may have ice in his veins. I don't know, but there's more pressure on Dubois in this fight. There's also more pressure on him because I think the world's expecting Dubois to knock Joyce out as well.
I think the lack of crowd could help both men.
Yeah.
Because the crowd usually leads you to retaliate when you shouldn't, because of pride, because of the raw, because of, people who you're thinking about in the crowd. And that will lead you to go into an exchange when you shouldn't, when you should just recoup and try to reset. So I think the lack of crowd there will help both men, and we might see a better fight before that. Technically, a better fight where we see the best of both men, where not one of them makes a silly mistake because of pride and because of the crowd cheering them on. Okay,
Andy Lee, Ben Davison and Gareth Davies. I think you all deserve a little cut from Frank Warren for promoting this fight so well. For breaking it down. And we'll find out all the answers on Saturday night. Thank you very much.
Umar,
cheers.
Before we all go, are we all giving our picks tonight or not?
I'm not sure Ben and Andy will do it, but Gareth, I think you've said Dubois, haven't you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, after everything that's been said here from the guys, particularly the guys, not really me, I think if you're picking and you're betting, you probably bet on Dubois winning inside 6. But I hope it doesn't go that way. I just hope it doesn't go that way because I hope we get a classic. I'm
not expecting picks, but I might as well ask Andy.
Go on, Ben.
I'll be honest. Like if I was picking a winner here, I've got to be honest, I would just be picking it'd be a random guess because there's so many questions to ask of each other. And on top of that, being completely honest, I really get on with Martin, get on with Sam and Joe. So I would rather not pick if I'm being honest. So, but like I say, there wouldn't be too much to
grow
go
a pair, Davison. Grow a pair.
Very diplomatic. Very diplomatic.
So you ought to be working for the government, not in the boxing.
No, anyway.
I want to say, I love Joe Joyce as well. I've got to say that. I love Joe Joyce,
If I had to pick, I would go with Dubois. I think a jab to the body draws the attention of Joyce, and then a right hand does the damage, and then there's a finish. I think Dubois. But I could be wrong, and if Joyce wins, I'd be just as happy. Nothing personal against either of them.
All right, we'll find out in 3 nights' time. Again, Andy, Ben, Gareth, thank you very much for breaking it down.
Cheers, lads.
Absolute pleasure. Cheers, gents.
Is your debt causing you sleepless nights? Knock your debt out with Debt KO. And your debt won't be the only thing keeping you up at night. Debt KO, free impartial advice on all your debt.